Hey everyone, welcome back to Humaning. I'm Emma and I'm here with Leo. We're so happy you're tuning in today. If you're new here, this is the podcast where we dig into what it really means to be human and how we can all live a little more consciously and intentionally. Today's topic is one I think a lot of us bump into sooner or later. Why you're not growing. Why does it sometimes feel like we're just stuck? Leo, I'm really excited to get into this with you.
Hey, Emma. And hey to everyone listening. Yeah, this is definitely a topic that hits home for me, and I know for a lot of people. Growth isn't just about chasing big goals. Sometimes it's about breaking out of those invisible ruts we find ourselves in, you know? Before we dive in, I just want to say, if you're enjoying the podcast or finding these conversations helpful, it'd mean a lot if you could hit like, subscribe, or leave a comment. It helps us reach more people who might need to hear this stuff. No pressure, obviously, but we really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for saying that. It really does make a difference. And honestly, this is the kind of conversation I wish I'd heard a few years ago when I was feeling a bit lost myself. I think almost everyone at some point has that moment of, why am I not moving forward? Why am I not changing the way I want to? So Leo, I'm curious, when you think about times you felt stuck, what comes up for you?
Oh man, so many times. I think the one that stands out most was right after college. You know, you have all this momentum, all these plans, and then suddenly real life just slows you down. I got into this routine: wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. It wasn't bad, but I wasn't growing. And it took me a while to realize, I wasn't challenging myself. I was just comfortable. It's so easy to confuse comfort with progress, don't you think?
Absolutely. Comfort can be such a sneaky trap. For me, it was in my late 20s. I'd checked off a lot of the shoulds, had a decent job, a routine, everything looked fine from the outside. But internally, I was restless. I kept thinking, is this it? I was waiting for growth to just happen to me, but it doesn't work like that, does it?
No, it really doesn't. I think that's the first big reason why people feel like they're not growing. They're waiting instead of actually doing. Growth isn't passive. It needs a nudge, sometimes a shove. I had to learn to get uncomfortable on purpose. Even small things like taking a different route to work or trying a new hobby can shake things up.
There's something so powerful in that, just intentionally stepping out of the familiar. And I get it. It's scary. Our brains are wired to avoid discomfort, but the irony is that's where the magic happens. I remember signing up for a public speaking course. I was terrified. But just the act of putting myself in that situation unlocked so much growth for me. Confidence, new friendships, even new opportunities.
That's awesome. And I love that you brought up fear, because I think that's another huge reason people get stuck. It's not always laziness or lack of discipline. It's fear. Fear of failing, fear of looking stupid, fear of what other people might think. I know for me, a lot of my stuckness came from not wanting to risk embarrassment.
Yes. And sometimes it's not even conscious. We convince ourselves we're too busy or not ready yet. But really, it's that deeper fear. I think that's why self-awareness is such a big part of growth. If you don't know what you're afraid of, you can't work through it. How do you get honest with yourself about what's holding you back?
For me, journaling helps a ton. I know it sounds cliche, but when I actually take 5 minutes to write about what I'm avoiding or what's stressing me out, I start to see patterns. Sometimes I'll realize, oh, I keep putting off this project because I'm afraid I'm not good enough. Once you name it, it loses some of its power.
That's so true. I'm a big fan of talking things out too, either with friends or honestly just out loud to myself. Sometimes I'll ask, what's the worst that could happen if I try this and fail? And usually the answer isn't as scary as I thought. But I love that point about patterns. It's like if you notice you're always stuck in the same area, that's a clue.
Totally. And sometimes the thing holding you back isn't internal at all. It's your environment. If everyone around you is content with the status quo, it's hard to break out on your own. I had a friend group where everyone just complained about their jobs but never did anything to change. It rubbed off on me, honestly. It wasn't until I started hanging around more ambitious people that I realized, wait, growth is normal. It's okay to want more.
That's such a good point. We really do become like the people we spend time with. And sometimes that means you have to make hard choices about who you let influence you. I remember feeling guilty for outgrowing certain friendships, but I realized it's not about judging anyone. It's just about protecting your own growth.
Right. And speaking of influence, I think another reason people stop growing is they stop learning. When was the last time you tried to learn something new just for the sake of it? Not for work, not for a goal, just curiosity.
Oh, I love that question. Honestly, I think as adults, we forget how to be beginners. We get so used to being good at things that starting something new feels embarrassing. But when you let yourself be a beginner, you open up this whole new world. I started learning to play piano during the pandemic, and I was so bad at first. But it was so freeing to just play, to mess up, and to improve a little at a time.
I love that. And it's such a good reminder that progress doesn't have to be fast, right? Sometimes we get frustrated because we want to be amazing right away. But growth is messy, it's awkward, and most of it happens in those little steps. I think social media sometimes tricks us into thinking everyone else is leveling up overnight.
Yes, the highlight reel effect. We see everyone's wins, but not the months or years of slow progress. I think if we could all be a little more honest about our journeys, it would be so much easier to give ourselves grace. I try to remind myself, my timeline doesn't have to look like anyone else's.
That's such a good mantra. And I want to circle back to something you said earlier about waiting for growth to happen. I think a lot of people are hoping for some huge breakthrough, but most growth is just stacking small habits over time. It's deciding, today I'll read a few pages of a book, or I'll go for a 10-minute walk. It adds up.
Yes, that reminds me of atomic habits, tiny changes that compound. Sometimes we underestimate the power of just showing up, even when it feels pointless. There were times I'd meditate for 5 minutes and think, is this even doing anything? But months later, I realized how much calmer and more focused I'd become.
And sometimes it's about unlearning things too. Letting go of old stories about yourself, like, I'm just not a creative person, or I can't stick to routines. I used to tell myself I wasn't a morning person, but once I stopped believing that, I experimented with different routines. Turns out, I actually love mornings now.
That's such a powerful shift, challenging your own limiting beliefs. And honestly, sometimes you need a little help to see them. I remember a mentor once telling me, if you feel stuck, ask someone you trust what they see in you that you might not see in yourself. That was so eye-opening for me.
That's huge. Sometimes we get stuck in our own heads and we can't see the progress we're making. Having someone reflect back to you, hey, you've grown a lot, can be the nudge you need to keep going. Have you had moments like that?
Absolutely. I had a friend recently point out that I'm way more assertive than I was a few years ago. I hadn't even noticed. Growth can be so subtle when you're living it day to day. That's why I love the idea of tracking your wins, even the small ones. It gives you evidence that you're moving forward, even if it doesn't always feel dramatic.
Yes, wins are wins, no matter how small. And even setbacks can be growth if you learn from them. I used to think a failure meant I was back at square one, but now I see it as part of the process. Like, okay, that didn't work. What can I try differently?
Exactly. And sometimes not growing is a sign that you need rest, not another push. I think we live in such a go, go, go culture that we forget rest is productive too. There have been times when I felt stuck, but really I was just exhausted. And after a break, suddenly I had new energy and ideas.
That's so true. Burnout can easily masquerade as being stuck. Sometimes your mind just needs space to breathe. I try to schedule do-nothing days every now and then. No goals, no plans. It feels weird at first, but I always come back with a fresh perspective.
You know, Leo, something you said earlier really stuck with me about setbacks being part of the process. I think a lot of us, when we hit a wall or have a failure, we immediately think, well, that's it for me. I'm not cut out for this. But honestly, I don't think I've ever grown without stumbling a little first.
Oh, absolutely. I actually think my biggest periods of growth have come right after a setback. There was this time I completely bombed a job interview, like blanked out, couldn't answer basic questions. I was mortified. But that experience forced me to rethink how I prepared, to practice in new ways, and to ask for feedback. The next time around, I was so much more confident. I wouldn't have leveled up if I hadn't failed.
That's so relatable. And I love that you were able to look at it as data, not just defeat. Like, what can I learn from this? Instead of, this means I'm not good enough. I think that's a huge mindset shift that helps people keep moving forward, even when they hit rough patches.
For sure. And sometimes, it's not even the big failures. It's the tiny, everyday disappointments. Like trying to build a new habit and missing a day, or getting rejected from something you really wanted. It's easy to spiral and think, I'll never get this. But if you just get back on the horse, that's growth.
And that's such a compassionate way to think about it. I always say progress, not perfection. I used to be so hard on myself if I didn't do something perfectly the first time. But now I'm trying to celebrate showing up at all. Even if I write one awkward sentence or go for a super slow run, it's still a step. I wonder, do you have any strategies for getting back on track after a setback?
Yeah, actually. One thing I do is try to zoom out. Like, literally, I'll look at my journal or calendar for the last month, and I'll ask, okay, was this really a total failure? Or just a blip on the radar? Most of the time, it's just one rough day in a sea of progress. That perspective helps me get out of that all-or-nothing thinking.
That's brilliant. And I think it ties into this idea of self-compassion, too. When we beat ourselves up, it just drains our motivation. But when you treat yourself like you treat a friend, hey, it's okay, just try again. It's so much easier to keep going. I actually started writing myself little encouraging notes for tough days.
I love that. Sometimes I'll actually say it out loud, like, it's all right, man, you're figuring it out. It sounds silly, but I think we don't realize how mean we can be to ourselves in our own heads. Giving yourself a break is huge.
Yes. And it's funny because sometimes the reason we're not growing is because we're putting way too much pressure on ourselves. I think about times when I set these massive goals, like I'm going to totally overhaul my life this month. And of course, I'd burn out. But when I start small and allow room for mistakes, I make way more progress.
That's so true. I'm the king of biting off more than I can chew. But then I realized you don't need a total life reset to grow. Like one tiny change, waking up 10 minutes earlier, learning one new word a day, can lead to bigger shifts over time. And it's way more sustainable.
And it's just so much kinder, too. I think we're conditioned to think growth has to be dramatic or painful, but honestly, sometimes it's just gentle improvement over time. That's why I love the concept of Kaizen, continuous incremental change. It takes the pressure off.
That's such a good point. And honestly, sometimes the most meaningful growth is invisible to other people. Like maybe you're learning to set boundaries, or to say no, or just to trust yourself more. Those aren't things you can post on Instagram, but they make a huge difference in your life.
Yes! Inner growth is so underrated. I remember a period where from the outside, nothing looked different. I had the same job, same apartment, same circle of friends. But inside, I was doing so much work. Therapy, reading, reflecting. And it totally changed how I saw myself and what I believed was possible.
That's beautiful. And I think it goes back to what we said earlier. Sometimes you don't notice your own growth until you look back. Like in the moment, it just feels like you're treading water. But then one day you realize, wait, I handle things so differently now.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, have you ever had a moment where you suddenly realized you'd grown even though you didn't see it happening at the time?
Yeah, actually. There was a situation at work where I had to have a really tough conversation with my boss. A few years ago, I would have avoided it at all costs. But this time, I just did it. I was nervous, but I was calm, and I spoke up for myself. Afterward, I realized, wow, old me would have never handled it like that. It was like seeing the evidence of all the small changes add up.
That's amazing. And I think those moments are so affirming, like, hey, maybe I am changing. Maybe these little efforts are working. That's why I love the idea of tracking progress, even if it's just jotting down little wins or using an app. It helps you see the arc of your own story.
Definitely. And sometimes, sharing those wins with someone else can make them feel more real. I've started doing weekly check-ins with a friend. We just send each other a message on Fridays, like, What went well this week? It's simple, but it keeps me accountable and makes me notice things I'd usually overlook.
I love that. It's so easy to focus on what's not working, but intentionally looking for wins, even tiny ones, can totally shift your mindset. And I think that ties in with gratitude too. When I focus on what's already going well, I feel more energized to keep growing.
For sure, gratitude is almost like fuel for growth. When you appreciate how far you've come, you're less likely to give up when things get hard. And on the flip side, if you're always beating yourself up, it's so much harder to find motivation.
That's so true. And I think it's worth saying, if you're listening right now and feeling frustrated with your progress, you're not alone. Everyone's path is different, and growth is rarely a straight line. Sometimes you're sprinting, sometimes you're crawling, and sometimes you're just resting. All of it is valid.
I love that. And actually, that reminds me, sometimes you need to mix things up to get unstuck. Like, if you're feeling stagnant, maybe you need a new challenge, or to change your routine, or even to take a break from something that's draining you. I've found that when I try something out of my comfort zone, even if it's small, it wakes me up again.
Yes, novelty is so powerful. Our brains love newness, and it doesn't have to be a big, dramatic change. Sometimes just rearranging your workspace, or listening to a different kind of music, or having a conversation with someone new can spark new ideas and energy.
Totally. And sometimes it's about letting go too, releasing old habits or commitments that aren't serving you anymore. It can be scary, but I've found that every time I clear space in my life, something new and better eventually fills it.
That's such a good point. We only have so much energy and attention, and if it's all tied up in things that aren't helping us grow, there's no room for anything else. I try to do a little life inventory every few months. What's working, what's not, what needs to change.
That's so smart. And sometimes, even just giving yourself permission to change is enough. I used to think, well, I've always done it this way, so I can't stop now. But the truth is, you can reinvent yourself as many times as you need to. There's no rule book.
Yes. And that's what being human is all about, right? We're not meant to stay the same. We're supposed to evolve, to try new things, to outgrow old versions of ourselves. It's both terrifying and exciting.
And honestly, it's a privilege to get to grow, to choose new directions. Not everyone gets that chance, so if you have it, don't take it for granted. Even if it's slow, even if it's messy, it's still worth it.
So true. And maybe just to bring it all together, if you're feeling stuck, maybe ask yourself, am I waiting for change, or am I making space for it? Am I being gentle with myself, and am I willing to try again even after setbacks? Those are the questions I keep coming back to.
I love that. And maybe try something new, no matter how small. Shake up your routine, talk to someone you admire, sign up for that class you've been eyeing. Just take one step, because you never know where it'll lead.
Yes, and celebrate the progress even if it's invisible to everyone else. Growth is personal, and it's yours to define.
Well said. And as we wrap up, I just want to thank everyone for spending your time with us today. If any part of this conversation spoke to you, or if you have your own stories about getting unstuck, we'd really love to hear from you. Leave a comment, send us a message, or share this episode with a friend. It really helps us keep humaning going and makes this community feel even more connected.
Absolutely. And if you haven't already, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the podcast. It's a small way to support us, but it means the world. More importantly, we hope you walk away today feeling a little more seen and a little more hopeful about your own journey.
Remember, growth isn't about perfection. It's about progress, and every step counts, even the wobbly ones. Be proud of yourself for showing up. We're proud of you too.
We really are. Thank you so much for joining us today on Humaning. We'll be back soon with more honest, real conversations. Take care of yourselves, keep growing, and don't forget to celebrate the journey.
Thanks, everyone. Until next time, keep humaning.
Bye for now.
See you next time.